The Clinton team has just released a brand new campaign commercial.
Hello, I'm Willie Weeble. Today we're going to Weeble Farm in our new horse and cart. Hello, Farmer Weeble. Afternoon, Willie. Have you seen my new animals? Oh, look, Granny, they wobble just like us. Let's go, everybody. Oh, where's Wendy gone? Perhaps she's gone to the new Weeble paddling pool. There she is. Oh, there are lots of exciting new things in the wonderful world of Weebles.
Well, we have been having this debate on the air now for months when it comes to issues related to the health of various candidates. And I have been one of those voices, probably one of the few in conservative media, urging caution, whether it be on the local level or on the national level, because I think sometimes we get into exaggerations. And as I said last week, none of us, unless, of course, you're living in Oregon where you can actually schedule it, you don't know when you're going to die. For the most part, that's just it's one of those things that your number comes up, you get called home and that's it. Hillary Clinton yesterday, if you didn't already know, how could you have missed this? It has been everywhere. And then when the video surfaced, it made it even much worse. Hillary Clinton said that she became overheated and overcome while she was attending a 9/11 ceremony in New York City, and then had to leave and went to her daughter's house and stayed there for a while, and then took off and went to her own home, which is about 45 minutes to an hour north of New York City, and then apparently spent the rest of the day there. 7 hours after all of this began, a doctor came out and said, well, she was diagnosed last Friday with pneumonia. Now, a friend of mine quickly emailed me and said if she has Parkinson's, which is one theory, that could also lead to pneumonia. There's another point that came up during the course of the last 24 hours when she came out of her daughter's house in a scripted moment. A little girl burst through the crowd and ran up and hugged her, and she stood there with her hands on the shoulders of the little girl. Turns out the type of pneumonia she potentially has is contagious, so the little girl may be needing some medical attention today as well. This thing is really, it is just spiraling, it seems, out of control. But what really did it was when the video was released. Media has been working for months to deflect people from this potential story. But when the video came out of her being loaded into the van yesterday, where she is just basically staggering and having to be picked up and thrown into the van like a rag doll, all of a sudden people took notice. And yet still, the leftists are doubling down. This morning, I was watching Fox and Friends at about 4 o'clock, and I flipped over to catch a few minutes of Morning Joe, which would be, yes, the bizarro universe of news. And they were mentioning it happening, and then they immediately said, but Donald Trump needs to release his tax returns. In other words, pay no attention to Hillary Clinton potentially getting very close to death over here. Donald Trump needs to let us know how much money he's made, where his money is going, etc. That again, it just shows you what they're engaged in. One Clintonista yesterday working on the campaign went so far as to tweet out that, hey, I live here, meaning New York City. It gets hot. People overheat all the time. Well, he didn't mention it was only 74 degrees. The humidity was only at 40%. The dew point wasn't much higher than that. It was actually the coolest morning in New York in weeks because they've been going through a heat wave. So in 74-degree weather, when it's not sticky outside, most people don't have these issues come up. Number two, if you've had pneumonia since Friday, how come nobody mentioned that? Because we've gone through the coughing fits, we've gone through the other fainting episodes, the concussions, the glasses that look like the rear windshield of an old 1974 Dodge Charger. All of these things have happened, and yet here we are. And now media is trying to deflect our attention away from it once more, all over again. But I would say that the story that came out as well this morning, and I happened to see it at Gateway Pundit, that some leading Democrats are planning to have a meeting so they can come up with an alternative because they're now worried she's not going to make it through Election Day, and they may replace her at the top of the ballot. Now, most likely that would be Tim Kaine. If it's Tim Kaine, that's a danger to the Republican Party because, well, Tim Kaine may be one of the few Democrats who's actually got a little bit of sanity going on between his ears. He's pro-life. He's had some very conservative positions in his past, albeit, when you're running for political office anymore, you can always throw aside whatever whatever convictions you have and just move on and adopt something new. Tim Kaine would be, I think, a formidable candidate. I don't believe that Joe Biden or Elizabeth Warren would be, not at this stage of the game. I just, if you're talking about Hillary, her health and being all over the place, and then you put some bumbling idiot like Joe Biden up there, ain't going to happen. But the fact that some of these people are even considering this, having this discussion, tells us they don't think that she has the stamina to get there, or that if she is elected, that she will have the stamina to handle the job. Because she took most of the month of August off from campaigning, if you recall. Other than a couple of appearances at her party's convention, she pretty much was out of view, doing a few fundraisers for scads and scads of money. But aside from that, she's just been AWOL. Now we perhaps know why. And then you throw in pneumonia, if indeed it is pneumonia, as they're claiming. And this is pretty serious business. 8:13, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This morning, Donald Trump made an appearance on Fox and Friends. And a lot of people were saying, oh, Trump's going to just tear into her. But listen to how polite he seems and how polite he comes across.
Something's going on, but I just hope she gets well and gets back on the trail, and we'll be seeing her at the debate.
It's starting to look as if Donald Trump, you always hear in media, no, they need to pivot for the general election. That means usually that you come out and you admit that everything you said in the primary season was a lie. And media is okay with that because, well, as we see on MSDNC, the truth and news don't really have a good relationship anymore anyway. But Mr. Trump, if there's a pivot going on here, it's not a denunciation of what he's already said. It's just a change perhaps in his tone, going to Mexico, going to Louisiana, and then not attacking his opponent because of health issues. All of a sudden, he's coming across as a lot more presidential. Here he is again, and he's actually saying that his own health is quite good, but says he'll have more details for the media if they'd like to know exactly how his constitution is.
I think it's an issue. In fact, this last week, I took a physical, and I'll be releasing when the numbers come in. Hopefully they're going to be good. I think they're going to be good. I feel great. But when the numbers come in, I'll be releasing very, very, very specific numbers.
Donald Trump appearing this morning on Fox and Friends after Hillary Clinton's episode yesterday. It's now 8:14. Telephone number if you'd like to reach our program, 736-0300, 736-0300. We're at 54. Not going to be an overly warm day today, and middle of the week, we start to see a bit of a warm-up, but it won't be nice again from a perspective of sunshine until this weekend. Now, most of you probably don't mind that if you're working a Monday through Friday schedule. Those of you, as a woman told me a couple of weeks ago at the grocery store, the Wednesday and Thursday of the week happened to be her weekend. So I do understand that we're not trying to sit here and somebody out there somewhere has got to be offended by something. You're up next. You're on the air on KLIX. Go ahead.
Yeah, yesterday, it's weird. I don't know why I switched. Normally on a Saturday or Sunday, I wouldn't watch Fox or anything, but I just happened to catch it. And, because of this release or the video, they cut away from not the celebration, but the event of 9/11 in New York. And Fox had it on there. And I saw that video. And I said to myself, okay, this thing is going to go viral. And will people be able to make a judgment? The independents, we know that the ones that are in the tank are never going to change. It doesn't matter whether or not she's propped up by stilts or whatever. And so, but do you think, how viral has this went? And this could really have quite an effect on the election. Do you believe that? And I'll just hang up, Bill. Thanks.
I think it could, because all of those people who've been sitting in the middle not knowing what they're going to do, they look at a photograph like that. I heard this morning, and some of the liberals were complaining because of there's comparisons to Jimmy Carter when Jimmy Carter was out for a run in a marathon and he collapsed. Well, hot day, and he was in great shape. I mean, he's still alive 40 years later. But it created a public perception that only dug the hole deeper for Jimmy Carter going into his reelection bid in 1980. And even though Hillary Clinton is not the president, she is the de facto incumbent here, pretty much seeking a third term to carry out what Mr. Obama has been doing. And again, I've tried to avoid these topics because health issues, we all deal with them. And, sometimes we get a little annoyed when someone says, well, you need to do this, you need to lose a little weight, or you need to, and you say, well, my blood pressure is fine, my blood sugar is fine, my heart's fine, my lungs are fine. Well, yeah, but I had an uncle back in New Jersey, and I don't care, you know. However, I saw a comment, snide comment, a guy I used to work with is a flaming liberal Democrat. And he made a nasty comment about how all of we Trumpists are just hateful people because of what we're saying now about Hillary Clinton's feigning episode. And another coworker from the same radio station back in the 1990s, in a separate comment on Facebook said, I remember what they said about Dick Cheney when he was having his heart issues. You know what the libs were saying? Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, I hope he dies. He deserves it. How about when Phyllis Schlafly died last week? Do you know what the libs said about that? Give me a break here, folks. We're dealing with these people who booed God, and they think it's okay to kill little children in their mother's wombs, and then they cheer that when their party leaders say, yeah, we'll allow more of that, and we'll allow it later in pregnancy. You're a despicable bunch. And to sit here and hear you whine and complain that people are being mean to your gal because she may not be fit for office seems to me to be quite a stretch after the way you've all behaved over the last 15 years when it comes to Republicans and conservatives. And in fact, I'm not hearing anybody out there cheering and saying, I hope Hillary Clinton doesn't make it. I've not seen one word along those lines from anyone in conservative media or at Twitter or at Facebook. It's not happening. People are legitimately concerned when they bring this up, wondering, right now you've got a North Korea that is building bigger and more expensive nuclear weapons that can reach, well, they could reach Twin Falls. Now, I don't know that we'd be ground zero for any North Korean attempts, but we've got to deal with that. We've got to deal with Iran. We've got China flexing its muscles. Do you want someone in public office who's going to be drooling on herself and constantly feigning? That's a question that the American people have to answer at this point. Bill Colley with you. See, there's a difference between someone who's running for a state legislative office who has had a couple of problems with issues maybe in the past, health issues, cancer, or heart troubles and the like. Nobody in Boise has their hands on a nuclear trigger. Big difference. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. On the other hand, national security could be at stake. Let's not forget that. It's 53. More on this subject on the way. Just wanted to let people know Randy Staples from Idaho Weekly Briefing is going to be joining us. There is something we're going to talk about this morning related to the White House Christmas tree lighting, and it may involve an Idaho connection. Way back when I was a wee lad, I think it was Christmas 1971, and my dad's cousin was up on the stage with President Nixon at the Christmas tree lighting, offering prayers. My dad's cousin, unlike a lot of people in my family, was actually successful. He was ordained a priest in the 1930s, late 30s, and then, along with several of his friends, they founded a college called Siena College. And then he became quite well known in education circles. And one day got a telephone call from the Nixon White House saying, would you like to participate in this event? And so he flew to Washington, and that's exactly what he did. Years later, I met a fellow who'd been with the Episcopal Diocese in Albany, New York, which was where the Siena College happened to be located. And I said, oh, you may know one of my former relatives. And as soon as I mentioned it, he said, oh, yeah, that guy was everywhere. I was happy to hear that. 825, Bill Colley with you on top. Here we go, Top Story. I'm having a Clinton moment in my throat here. Some nasty person did suggest online that it could be chlamydia. It could come from her husband that causes all the coughing. I won't get into that this morning. I want to talk to you about a happier thing for a moment, and that would be how to put your life back together. In fact, for your health and your overall, wellness and just your overall well-being with your family. Dr. Eric F. Jones uses a holistic systemic approach to wellness, and he's been in practice now since 1993. He has master's and doctoral degrees in marriage and family therapy. Dr. Eric F. Jones uses methods of alternative healing, such as naturopathy, medicinal herbs, nutrition, sound waves, intellectual cognitive self regulation, and apathy to help remedy and manage mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual challenges. He's currently accepting new patients, and he has evening and Saturday appointments available. His telephone number, 731-7178, and Dr. Jones is on Facebook. Eric F. Jones, PhD, mental health and wellness therapist. You'll find it there, and that's Eric with a C. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is from Eric Erickson writing at The Resurgent, and he's a conservative but no fan of Trump's. But he titles this, Imagine if the GOP carried water for Trump like Dems do for Hillary. And he references one of Hillary's campaign people whining that of course, the guy says, well, I live here in New York. I know how somebody could get overheated. In other words, since I live here, you can't question me. But Erickson says it was below 75 degrees, less than 40% humidity in New York City with a breeze when Mrs. Clinton supposedly got overheated. I don't know many people that get overheated in a dew point when the dew point's low and the temperature's in the low 70s. And then this is the other story that I happened to reference earlier. Hillary embraces child despite contagious pneumonia. This from Kyle Olson at the American Mirror. After Hillary Clinton's medical episode, it was suddenly announced she was diagnosed with pneumonia. Actually, it took them 7 hours to say she'd been diagnosed 2 days earlier. But that didn't stop her, he writes, from recklessly embracing a child on a New York City street on Sunday, despite the fact that her illness is contagious. The child ran past a protective detail to greet Clinton in what some are saying was a staged event. I like children, especially when I stew them in a pot. How about this? This comes from Gateway Pundit. Reporter David Schuster posted to Twitter Sunday evening that operatives in the Democrat Party have told him an emergency meeting by the DNC is being considered, that would be their national committee, to replace presidential nominee Clinton on the heels of her case of pneumonia, allegedly caused her to collapse Sunday morning at the 9/11 commemoration at Ground Zero in New York. How about this? This is from the Washington Post. Finally, a writer at the Washington Post named Chris Sleeza said something to the effect that he was telling people just 5 days ago to stop hammering on Hillary about her health. Shut up, go away. You're just a bunch of mean-spirited conservative knuckle draggers. And he says after seeing the video yesterday, it's like, okay, maybe there is a problem. Remember that picture that was taken of her where she was being carried up steps to a Victorian house from it was South Carolina last February? And everyone said, well, her campaign said it was slippery, so they were helping her on the steps. But she looks like they're carrying a wet bag of cement up the stairs that day, which leads you to believe it looked a lot like what we saw yesterday, that this is something that is a much more permanent condition. It's got nothing to do with ice or pneumonia. And I'm telling you right now, if we don't hold their feet to the fire, here's another one, by the way. Dan Balls, who also writes for the Washington Post, his nickname being No, he says Clinton's deplorables remark sums up a deplorable election season. Liberals are already saying, well, she's absolutely right. A lot of you people out there, you're absolutely deplorable. You aren't all cultured like we here in the media. When they keep saying, could this be her Mitt Romney moment? First of all, I don't think that Mitt Romney's 47% comment had one whit of difference in the election 4 years ago. Media thinks it did because media thinks it has some sort of Svengali-like power over this whole situation, but it doesn't. Romney's problem was, as usual, he came out when he was questioned about it and said, I'm sorry, I don't mean to hurt anybody's feelings. Please leave me alone. If he had just said, yeah, half the country's on welfare and we're dang sick and tired of paying for it, that would have done him a much better. You can't have a wimp running for high office any longer. It just doesn't work. Randy Staples will be along in about 10 minutes from Idaho Weekly Briefing. sharing some thoughts with us on how government works, and especially related to the Department of Education. And that's on the way, as I say, at about 8:43 this morning. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and News Radio 1310.com. We want to thank Dr. Christine Pickup for dropping into the studio last week and visiting with us. I noticed the video that we posted for her appearance did quite well with the number of page views that it has. Of course, she is a doctor of audiology at Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert, and she reminds you, if you're like most people, you think of hearing as something that happens in the ears, but indeed, the brain is where all the work's really being done. It's where sound becomes the details. Your brain has to work hard to make this happen. When the sound signals from your ears are compromised, your brain has to work even harder to fill in all of those gaps, and that effort does take a toll. Don't let your brain down, she reminds you. Take care of your hearing with the help of Mount Harrison Audiology. You can call the office, the telephone number 312-0957. And she'd like to remind people, too, as well, that she remains the only locally owned and operated hearing center in southern Idaho. 8:35 now and 54. Mentioning Donald Trump earlier, the folks in the mainstream media, in order to try and deflect the attention away from Mrs. Clinton's obvious health problems, are going to be bringing up more and more details about Trump's supposed connection to the president of Russia. Even though the White House and State Department have just worked out a deal with the Russians to try to bring about a ceasefire in Syria, which supposedly is beginning just about, well, right now. Here's the thing. You want to talk about presidents who are in bad shape health-wise. We had one president who was in a wheelchair for 12 years. That was Franklin Roosevelt. And yet Franklin Roosevelt actually worked with Russian leaders, well, Soviet leaders. He worked with Joseph Stalin against a common enemy during World War II, and it was a pretty good partnership. Stalin, on the other hand, murdered 10,000 Ukrainians, or 10 million, 10 million Ukrainians. I don't mean to make light of that whatsoever. Much less millions of other people, too, across his own country before he even got into the war with Germany. And then the murder just got stepped up into a degree where it was on par with anything Hitler or Chairman Mao ever did. But we worked with that man. Now, Vladimir Putin may not necessarily be the most dignified guy in the world, but he's nicer than Stalin. He's got enemies in these Muslim republics all along his southern border. He's had to deal with them with terrorist attacks at a school in Beslan, Russia, as well as a theater in Moscow. They've had to deal with us off and on for years. It is a Christian country, mainly Russian Orthodox. In fact, he's trying to but again, it's his own country. We can't make decisions for other people. He's trying to stamp out evangelical movements in his country, but that's because the Orthodox Church is so tightly intertwined with the history of his country. So he's got all of that going on, and he's making war against what might be a common enemy. And Trump is simply saying, should we drop? There was a time when liberals absolutely loved the old Soviet Union because they had so much in common with it. Now it's gone, and they can't stand the Russians. But they want to fight the Cold War. Now they'd like to pick it up again and start it all up and do it all over. Well, all right, what's the end game here? Nuclear war? Do they really think that we should be doing something like that to save a few provinces in the Crimean Sea? I don't have any plans to get involved in anything like that. We've got so many problems of our own that we've got to work on. But they're hammering Trump on this, trying to make it look as if somehow Trump is working with the enemy. And then when they say, well, the Russians will try and mess with our elections, they'll hack our election machines, our voting machines, and then they'll try to turn the election around in Trump's favor. So in comes Jay Johnson from the Department of Homeland Security, which is a redundant office in the first place. Central Intelligence is supposed to be handling most of what Homeland Security does. But in comes Homeland Security and says, we will ensure that this election is fair. In other words, we've already managed to turn the IRS loose on the Tea Party movement. We've already turned the Justice Department loose on cake bakers and wedding photographers. So therefore, we're going to come in and make sure it's a fair election. No, this is just an excuse to try and give the election to Hillary Clinton or whoever the Democrats may have to go with if she can't make it. But it's an effort to stop Trump. That's what this is really all about. And you're not getting the truth from the mainstream media, but you already knew that. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. Randy Staple is coming up with us in a few minutes from Idaho Weekly Briefing. And if I could mention this as well, speaking of mainstream media, which believes it's far more influential than it actually is, there's another effort coming about. The media starting to gin it up. They're beating the drum for that phrase, add the words. In other words, for extra constitutional rights for various people in the state of Idaho because they have a different sexual persuasion. We'll talk about that if we get a chance in the next hour of the show. In the meantime, it's 20 minutes from 10 o'clock, or 9 o'clock, excuse me. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com.